Well, hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the Layoff Legends podcast. We have a very special guest today in line with season one's focus on mental health and resilience. I would like to welcome Marcus Alexander to the podcast. Marcus, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it, man. Nice to be here.
Great to have you. And for those of you who don't know, I would just love to read a quick bio that we have for Marcus very quickly so we can get into some of the great content that we have today. Marcus Alexander is a licensed professional counselor in multiple states and earned his bachelor's degree in business administration and master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. He works with professionals dealing with work related issues, and so really happy about that experience and bringing that here. Marital and relationship issues, family issues, self esteem, as well as confidence work. Marcus guides individuals through the process of identifying their goals by bringing awareness to their current state and effectively accessing the roadblocks that are present or may be present in preventing them from achieving the goals that they set out to achieve. He uses a cognitive behavior technique that focuses on the mental process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. And this covers the individual's entire lifespan, not just in the recent years. And I love this approach because the business experience and kind of like the clinical training really blends together. Mark, you're not the average therapist, and I really appreciate that perspective. You'll work with tons of mental health agencies. You work with schools, and you lead a successful private practice that serves
Mhm.
professional individuals at all levels. And a lot of your clients, as you share here, are in executive leadership roles, that need help navigating the high stakes corporate environment while also maintaining fulfilling lives. That's a fantastic balance that I really appreciate.
Yeah.
And prior to your work as a counselor, you served in the U.S. Air Force. So thank you for your service.
Yep.
That's amazing. Uh, Before spending 17 years in leadership roles, 17
Yep.
years in
Yeah.
leadership roles for several
Yep.
Fortune 500 companies. Your diverse personal and professional experiences really bring a fresh and relevant perspective. You bring a compassionate and straightforward approach to therapy. Really looking forward to that perspective today. So clients can see and feel results in their very first encounter with you. Marcus, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
No, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for inviting me.
So there's been a lot of news, of course, layoffs everywhere. And we are
Absolutely.
seeing talented people get laid off from some of the world's best companies. And this is
Absolutely.
not just, another announcement. This is happening, and this is on the rise. And we're seeing a lot of news about this, in terms of not just the layoff, but even how the layoff is positioned,
Yep.
business expense, a
That's
performance
right.
decision, all of these things. And it can get really confusing for the folks who are laid off. But why don't we start from the beginning, right?
Okay.
The impact. And so there's an emotional life cycle that kind of
hmm
comes with the job loss. Today,
hmm
everything's great. You receive this news, and then ultimately you're thrust into this cycle. Could you share a little bit about what that emotional life cycle is?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. It's very similar. I mean, the grief is grief, right? We always want to contextualize grief to a certain thing, but it's the same process, right? You have the five stages, but with when you talk about employees, it's a different stage. All right. The first stage, which is disassociation. I think that when you work for these companies that create an identity for you because of their identity, you see this happen year to year, month to month when other people are getting laid off, and you're like, not me, right? I'm gonna be immune from it. So you dissociate yourself from it, and the first step is kind of getting aligned with reality, because once the layoff hits you, now you have a step you have to go through before you even get to denial, right? Which is, oh, I'm not different, right?
Oh,
And I think
wow.
that's a big one. That's a big adjustment that takes the longest to get through, right?
Hmm.
So once you get through that adjustment of reality and kind of what has happened, meeting, now you can go into the denial part. You For the first part, people deny that they even got laid off, right? It's almost like they still keep their same routine as if they have what I call the badge to the office, right? And they do this for several reasons, right? They employees, their peers, their family, they don't want to face the reality of that part, right? That they have to now adjust. So they delay what they call the adjustment period for a little bit longer. And then the real important part, this is when I get to see the client, is when anger hits. I'm frustrated. right? I did not get told or was not warned or why would they do this because of this particular reason. And all of a sudden they go back and they become angry with the person that they was in love with, if it makes sense, the company itself, right? So I worked them through that anger process, but then they get to the point where the client and myself have what I call the emotional tuggle. We struggle through this part of bargaining, right? So they reach back out to their past supervisor to get clarity. They reach back to their peers to say, "Hey, what's going on now?" They still try to live in both worlds, right? And they ask themselves, not the employee, but they ask themselves, "What can I do to get back in, right? In that position, whether it's financial position, whether it's title." How do I get back to that position? And they try to, in essence, if you don't manage this right, they will sell themselves out to get back to the position they were. Once they get past that stage and we work through that stage, which is accepting who you are and understanding that the skill, the value is you, right? The company can only thrive because of the value of the people, right? So once you realize you're part of the value, which means you did get something from the company that's invaluable, which is experience. Once you get that, now you own that value. And now we try to toggle between bargaining and depression because now if you don't see the value in you, depression hits right away.
Hmm.
Right. And depression is nobody else wants me. I'll never make as much money as I did before. How
Hmm.
can I go get a title when there's only few amount of titles out there like that, right? You start telling yourself that you're on the outside looking in. So we have to toggle through that part, right? Get that part. So now we built the skill set because we did the assessment of your skills. And now we got to get the mental side of, right? Where your cognition matches your actual skill set. And now you get that confidence back, right? It's kind of like the love and belonging back because individuals put love and belonging in the company and not themselves along the way. And it happens so subtle that you can't see it, right? In the years you work for that company. So, but once we get through all that through therapy, right? And or the client gets through that themselves, because you don't necessarily need therapy to do it if you have self-awareness, but you have to process that stuff. And once you process that and you get to the point where you like, I am the value, meaning I can go out and I can make a life for myself based on these newly assigned goals that I've placed on myself, not goals that other people have placed on me. Now you take the skill set and now you use that as resources. And now the power comes back to you, right? And a lot of people get to that point. And that's when acceptance come in, right? You accepting the fact that I had a tenure at this place. I gained some things and I probably lost some things. But at the end of the day, I can move on to the next chapter of my life. And then that's when you really have the empowerment placed back into you. So 5 steps you have to go through. And those 5 steps are very, very subtle, right? You're not going to just see it in your face. So you have to be careful that you're not reacting to those 5 stages from a standpoint of unawareness. Because if you do, then now you're going to add problems to your life, not solve for the problem that already exists, which is the layoff itself and the transition of life. So, but a therapist will help you with that. That's what I help a lot of clients with is that transition. And the other piece of it, which after acceptance, which is now after acceptance, you think, well, I'm done. I'm good, right? But really, you just starting because now you got to go look for that next position or that next chapter of your life. But you're doing it now back at zero versus at a deficit when you were laid off. If that makes sense. So.
Now, Marcus, that's amazing. And you just talked about this spectrum, right? This journey. And I think for us in tech, we have this type A, type double A personality, right? Okay, move
Hmm.
fast. You're super smart. You're doing all these things. But okay, great. I got to get through these 5 stages so I can go to the other side. Is this something we have to go? Is this a 6 month thing? Like, do we just take it as it comes? Hey, when it comes, it comes. We go through these 5 stages. How do we think about these 5 stages, or do we just naturally, it just comes with time as you pay attention to your feelings in the process?
Well, it's definitely individualized, right? Because
Hmm.
everybody comes into tech a different way, right? So,
Hmm.
so we have to first start with how did you witness that relationship? Because that
Hmm.
relationship for some people, where they came in knowing that, hey, it might be an end to it, right? Some people came in and saying CEO is going to be where I end up at, right? So everybody comes in a different way. So your goals when you entered and how you proceeded through your career is going to affect how far the fall is, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So, but to your point, right, you have to kind of not put a timeline on it because that adds more stress.
Mm.
right? What you have to do is really establish goals and let your goals set the time for you, not you. Because sometimes when you set the time, then now you try to fit the reality into that time frame, and that
Mm-hmm.
causes anxiety, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what I try to do is say, okay, now you know you have a, because most companies, especially at the high level, have severance packages, right? So how I use that time is, okay, Marcus, I have a severance package. I still get my benefits. I still get paid for the next 6 months to 12 months. Some people negotiate more, right? So whatever that severance package is, I use that as a kind of a baseline to sit there and say, we got this amount of time to get going, right? Mentally. I'm not talking about for another job, but mentally. Because once we get your mental going, the job is easy because I already know, and hopefully you would already know the skills are in you, right? You didn't leave your skills when you left the company, right? You know, like you
Yep.
left your key card. So the skills are in you, which means there's always going to be somebody who needs your expertise. You just have to now mentally get to the point where you divorce yourself from the company that gave you those skills. That's
And
the process.
that process is really powerful. There's something you said that I think is very unique. That's unique to the tech community. It says, and you said when you came into tech, I think that a lot of these companies have a very high bar to get in. And so,
Absolutely.
yes, you clear that bar through the interview process, working incredibly hard, and there's an identity that comes with that.
That's
Hey,
right.
at
That's
Google,
right.
I work
That's right.
at Amazon, I work at Tesla, and all of these things I think affect to a certain extent our identity. Is that identity in itself? Because you are in this rarefied air, right? Of
Hmm.
companies, you're working with some of the best companies in the world.
Hmm.
How does that now affect how you process the layoff of that thing? You've worked so hard to get here. You have so much status in being in these companies. It's such a proud thing to say you work at these companies and then suddenly you're laid off. Is there a different experience here with shame when, especially when you've gone through that very heightened sense of identity?
Yeah, it is, and that's the part that you have to work through. I would say one on the initial sessions, that's what you
Mm-hmm.
have to work through. Is it was I call it imbalance of power.
Mm.
And when you took on that position, right? Because you had the company who was sexy, who was great, who everybody revered, give you an offer at the lowest time of your life, probably, right? You just graduating college or in transition from another company. So you're really at your professional lowest because you absolutely need this company to for a financial gain or for an image gain. So when they say yes to you, right, it's almost like getting proposed to. So you're taking this like, wow, we're going to be together forever, and I'm accepted, right? This level of acceptance that you have, which is all valid, right? Because it's the highest of the high, right? We're not dealing with a company that settles for less than. So when you get to these companies, you're like, yes, I'm part of the team, which now you're now emotionally connecting to everybody else, even though you might not talk to them on a daily basis. Everybody around you are what we call equals, meaning they understand what I went through at some level.
Mhm.
So you're emotionally attached to that community. And what happens is, and especially with companies like Microsoft, they put you on teams. So you're working with teams of people who are just like you, right? But imagine now getting that call or getting that email or getting that face to face saying that, okay, you're no longer part of the team, right? It's almost like, to some people, it's almost like your mom and dad saying, we don't need you in the family anymore. Great. And
Mhm.
because it's a family for some people, they see it as this is a part of who I am, right? When I tell people my name is, it's my name is, and I work for,
Mhm.
right? So most people don't even say that about their parents, who they revere, right?
Yeah,
Right?
the
So,
dissociation, just being able to disconnect your identity from, well, first of all, the cut was a shock. You
right.
love this place, you've identified with this place so long, and then suddenly the cut, right? And then you have to your point earlier around, that's the first thing, accepting that this has happened.
Yep.
And that is the
Yep.
first part to, and really it is a grieving process that comes ultimately to a healing, and then also whatever that next chapter is that you said, um,
Yeah.
that becomes, but it's a journey that you actually have to go through, and it starts with accepting this.
No, absolutely. I would sit there and say for most people, it's more than a death in the family, right? Because a death in the family doesn't stop you from paying your mortgage. A death in the family doesn't stop you from moving on.
Hmm.
But a death in this family is like I lost a family member and now I'm almost homeless. And
Hmm.
homeless in the sense of figure. I mean, not literally, but figuratively. I'm homeless. I mean, I don't have a host company that I can say I belong to this, right?
Hmm.
So so
Usually.
you're now trying to manage kind of who am I, and still grieve with who was I when they rejected me, right? Because the key to all of this and mental health in general is how do I see myself versus how they see me,
Hmm.
right? And at some point you thought at some level, and you were aligned, like I see myself as great and they see me as great. Perfect. Let's get a
Hmm.
cup of coffee. But at some point in the layoff, the reality is, wait a minute, they don't see me how I see myself.
Hmm.
And now you got to fight that. Do I see myself as they see me, or do I see myself as I see? You have to fight that, because if you attach to what they see, then you're going to attach a negative emotion to it, which is the rejection, which is I'm not good enough, which is, I failed. And now all of a sudden you have to kind of dig out that hole of that negative thinking, right? Because with that negative thinking, you're not going to go to a new employer and thinking that they're going to pick you and say that you're confident enough. And that's the big thing too. Let's go back to the question about tech. The one thing you have to be in tech is confident, right? A lot of
Hmm.
jobs you don't really have to be as confident, but tech, you got to be confident, right? Because it's the competition, it squeezes at the top, right? So you can't come in with no confidence, because even people with less skill and more confidence will get the position, right? It's that type of thing. The skill will eventually kind of show itself, but not before you get offered the job. So you got to have a level of confidence. So can you imagine somebody grieving and not feeling good about themselves and trying to get a tech job? It's just not going to work, right? Because you're already still living in that unprocessed relationship before, and now trying to get a new relationship. They're
Hmm.
going to see right through you,
Hmm.
right? So you got to be careful that your mind is right, because when they ask questions about where you're going and you're still where you were, it's going to be a misalignment there in the conversation, in the interview process, and all. And this is outside of skills, right? Because your skills remain the same.
Hmm.
Your confidence in that is going to be a little different. So a lot of times these jobs, 99.9% of these jobs are identifying confidence first, because they assume in tech, they assume you have the skill set, unless you're just outright lying and you're going to get caught quickly, right? But they
Hmm.
assume you have the skill set. What they're really testing for is, do you have the mental makeup to do this? Right? Because it's going to be fast paced, it's going to be high stakes, it's going to be some things that you're going to do, and we need you to be mentally in tune with that.
No, thanks, Marcus. That's really interesting. There was something that you mentioned earlier around the identity, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they see me as this, I see myself as this, and there's this match. And of
Yep.
course, once the breakup happens, there is this mismatch, and
Yep.
you have to now rediscover your identity. Who am I? And you mentioned around uh, seeing yourself is one of the most important parts of that. How do people reset that identity? One of the interesting things, I was chatting with a friend who was also laid off, and he was laid off, I think, a year ago, and he said one of the hardest questions he has to answer in his journey is when he goes out. And of course, in the American, in our society, the first thing you ask is, "Hi, what's your name? What do you do for a living?" And that
Mm-hmm.
is one of the hardest questions for him. And he stopped going out because of that. He knew he was going to receive that question. So when you
Mm-hmm.
think about identity reset, I'm curious, how do some of your clients deal with this, or how do you encourage others to think about you're not where you used to be? And I love what you said. Hey, you didn't leave your skills behind when you left your badge behind. How
Yep.
do you encourage our listeners to think about their identity and, if possible or if necessary, reframe the identity from who they were to who they are and who they want to be?
Well, this is going to be a little deeper. I'm going to go into it a little bit and do some analogies so I can help the common person who's listening to this understand, right? You are now a free agent, right?
Hmm.
Which means that if you look at it from a sports analogy, right, you don't lose who you were because this team didn't want you. There's
Hmm.
still a bunch of teams out there that want you, right, and that need that skill set. So the first you call it reset, I call it just reimagining who you are, right? You got to go back to who you, because you never lost it. It's just you're not tapping into it at that moment because of
Hmm.
the grief, right? So you just have to tap back into who you really are. So when you're a free agent, which most people who get laid off are, believe it or not, right, you have power. You just have to figure out how to harness that power and use it for your good, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. That's where the skill assessment comes in play, right? The experience you have, right? You come in play. And then now you have to assess the field that's out there that needs my help, right? And I think once you divorce yourself from that particular company that you left, it's easier to do that. And when I say that, meaning you have to see yourself for who you are. So for instance, I know your name is Leo, right? If I tell you your name is Scott, which is what the company tells you at some point, right? I know you think you're Leo, but now to me, you're Scott. If you start answering as Scott, then you lose yourself.
Mm.
If you sit there and say, I know I'm Leo, I got a birth certificate, I understand who I am, you just didn't like me, now I remain Leo, which means I still keep myself and I work for someone else, right? But I think sometimes people believe what the company tells them, right? Well, you're not needed, you were underperformed, whatever it is, they subscribe to it because the value they placed in the company, which means that when you lost yourself, now the company controls your identity, not you, right? So, but when you control your identity, trust and believe these other companies know because they do it too. These other companies know that sometimes we lay off good people. We lay off excellent people because it's a dollar thing. It's not about your skill
Mm-hmm.
set, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they know that. So when you're applying for these companies and you use the word, I've worked for Microsoft, or here's the skills I obtained from Microsoft, or here's what I learned from Microsoft, they're looking at it like, bing, 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 free agent. We don't have to train them or her. They come in already trained, which adds value to that company. But you got to see it that way because if you only see it in terms of the relationship that you leaving, then you're always going to see yourself in a deficit and be rejected. That makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. And it's interesting as you talk about reimagining. One of the things that comes to mind, you're using basketball analogies here. I love this concept of an ESPN highlight reel, where literally
Mm-hmm.
like they show the best moments of the game, and
Absolutely.
it's like you have to do that for yourself. You have to
Absolutely.
look, can you like, oh wow, okay, I did this in my previous role, did this in my previous company, did this. Like,
Absolutely.
you know what? And this is something I think resonates with our community because there is this struggle between what you were told
Mm-hmm.
and what you've done and who you are. And you're like, wait, hang on a second. You're like, no, 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 there's a
Right.
mismatch here. And then I look at some of these folks, and we're talking to so many people that have been laid off,
Mm-hmm.
and you realize, like, damn, dude, you got some game. Like, oh my gosh, you are a
Mm-hmm.
free agent now.
That's
Now
right.
there's a second part of that, which is telling your story. What team do you want to go play for now?
That's right.
Do you want to do like, you want to do remote? You want to do person? There's so many things, but you get clearer on what you've achieved, but then also what you're looking for, which I think is a very valuable part of
After
what
you
you're doing.
after you process the divorce, though. You
Yes, yes.
can't do that all at the same time because you'll get confused about who you are. You
Mm-hmm.
have to first establish, I know who I am.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know the situation, right? Think about this, Leo. Uh, 100% of the layoffs are all subjective,
Mm.
right? We think it's very objective, right? And that's our first kind of alignment that we have to get. We think that they're taking all these algorithms and saying that I'm the lowest of the low, and no, it's people in the room that are making decisions when you're not in the room,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you don't ever have a chance to even give your side of the story until after the decision is made, right? So you have to understand that and say it's okay. It's like ice cream, right? Ice cream is a wonderful thing that's been around for years, but everybody doesn't like it. But the people who do like it, they love it. Your job now is to find someone who loves it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously they didn't like it anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason. And I try to teach them that it's not okay. It's okay if they didn't like it. You don't spend your time on people who don't like you. You spend
Mm-hmm.
your time on people who like you, who love you. And that's where I focus their time on because there's more people out there that will love you than that one person that didn't like you. But if you see that one person as your end all be all, then you never move on, which you'll never be accessible for the people that love you. So that's
Wow.
the part that I try to get people to see, right?
And Mark, you're dropping some gems
Accessibility.
here. I think that we can keep on going on
Oh
this.
yeah.
It's really powerful. Wow. Okay. Can we talk a little bit about community and the people that you surround yourself with, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that you talked a little bit about family earlier. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what role does community play? Like, how important is it to surround yourself with people? And I share this story in our intro video where I'm talking about this idea, this laid off legends experience, and the gentleman turns to me and says, I love this idea. I was laid off and I'm too embarrassed to talk about it. I
Hmm.
didn't have anybody to talk about it with. And so, curious your thoughts on the role of community and how sharing this experience with others helps reshape the narrative.
Yeah, I think you have to, because I think that's the first, again, detachment that you have, right? Because you're part of a team, you get laid off, the other team is still there. So that was your community at one point, right? That was the people that you interacted with on a daily basis, at least professionally and sometimes even personally.
Hmm.
So once you are laid off, you got to understand that the people who are at the still the team, they're changing too, how they interact with you, right? Because again, relationships, whether we agree with it or not, or somewhat transactional. What can you do for me? What can I do for you? Right. The moment you serve no purpose for me, I have to now tap into what our long term goals were as a partnership or whatever the case may be. So if you are still attached to that, and then they're changing because they still have a different objective now than you do, it's a different goal, then you're going to feel even more rejected, right, on different levels. So you have to form a community that understands where you came from, right? Which is why I told you this podcast is beautiful, because what it does is it doesn't create the community. It identifies that the community exists, and everybody's out there individually trying to work on them themselves, versus now collectively we can come together and see what the path forward looks like, because someone has already paved the road before. So you're identifying a bunch of people, and I call them free agents. I hate to call them laid off, right? That word is scary to me, only because laid off seems that there's only one place to go, and you didn't make it. But free agent meaning that place didn't see your skill set or didn't value your skill set anymore, and now you can take it to someone else. You still are in control of that, right?
I
So you
love
got
that.
a bunch of free agents out here,
Yeah,
man.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's so great. Yeah.
yeah. So you don't give power to the company who is built on the backs of the free agents, right?
Yeah.
At some point, the whole company started with two free agents. You look at the owners of any company, right? It's always a free agent, right? They didn't have any stake in the game until they did the work. And now they created work for other people to come in and add value. Remember, the people add value. So if you look at the company as the value, then you're already in a negative state, right?
Hmm.
So that's how I look at it. The community that you form has to be people who understand their value. You
Hmm.
can't form a community with people who don't know their value, because then there's going to be a negative return, right? You're just going to, misery loves company, right? You got to get people who understand that, hey, I obtained this superpower. What's your superpower? And now all of a sudden, now you take your superpower and now you go out and you try to solve problems for other companies, right? Or some people get real creative and say, I'm gonna start my own,
Hmm.
right? And now they're starting their own. But either way, you want to make sure you don't lose yourself and your superpower in this process, right? Because it's still with you. So, so I love the fact that you're building a community with people who also have superpowers, right? And now we can come together, and you can. I like what you call it, right? The league, because I grew up hey, look, the League of Justice. I grew up on it, right? So I love it, right? It's a combination of all the people who have powers to work toward one mission and one goal, which is how do we reestablish ourselves to be able to be of value to the community and to other companies out here. So, and don't lose yourself in the process. So,
Mark, this is fantastic. And in every time, like these types of concepts are so deep, and we can go into them. And of course, I know we're gonna have you back. But I'm just curious. So let's just end on that point. You talked about don't lose yourself, maintain your superpower. And I think that that is something that's so critical, because if your confidence is hit, you're like, ugh, your identity is hit, you're like, ugh, and you talk about finding your voice and ensuring that like you maintain that strength. What are some of the practical ways that you can do that? I mean, we talked about the ESPN highlight reel, surrounding yourself with great people. What are some of the ways that people, like literally on Monday morning, right? That they can say, look, I need to maintain this superpower. I need to make sure I don't lose confidence in myself. Any thoughts or guidance there?
yeah, yeah, superpower. Now, let me make sure I make this clear. Your superpower and your confidence are two different things, right?
Hmm.
So the problem with the confidence is that you don't know your superpower. So they all intertwine that way, right? So the task you have to do is assess yourself like you assessed everything in your life, right? Because in your work life, whatever position you have, you assess some things, right? Or you either assess it as a team leader or you assess it as the person who was getting information from the leader. But you assess, everybody manages something, right? So you have to manage your power by going back through your resume, right? And I call it chapters of the book, right? Because you've written a book here. So Leo, if you're 45, 46 years old, you got 46 chapters, right? And out of those chapters, you got X amount of chapters that are professionally done, right? So what you have to do at that point is you have to read your own book, right? The more you read your own book, the more you not allow other people to write your book for you. If that makes sense, right? So you read your own book, and as you're reading your book in your experience, now we're talking professional life. In your experience, you're looking at the things that you've done, right? And when you're looking at those things, which even the bad things, right? I'm talking about people who come to me and said, "Man, I've gotten a terrible review," right? I said, but let's use that and secrete the positive from it. Because even in the negative, there's some positive there, right? So I changed their mindset to where they're not so anxiety ridden about having negative, but understanding how to process that negative and then squeeze the positive out of that because you're going to the future. So you want even the negative conflict to be something you can add to the future self. So even this layoff, which you can perceive as negative, we can find it positive by looking back now with time and saying, look at all the stuff you accomplished. And now let's reimagine the person that you are today because we're not resetting anything because you're already that person. We're just reimagining that person because it's making you a better person because of that negative influence, right? So now you're taking even your negative experience and saying, this is how I am coming out of this in a positive way, which means now to your new employer, they're seeing even a better version than the old employee had,
Hmm.
right? Employer had. So now they're seeing a version that is more intuitive and more understanding because they have processed something. It's nothing like processing your own stuff in order for you to process the stuff I want you to do, right? Because if you can process you, then I know you can process what I give you, right? Because you matter to you more than anybody else, right? So that's how you learn how to get these skill sets, even from a negative standpoint, and understand how not to lose yourself, but also get back to you, right? In other words, reimagine who you are. You have to make sure you assess yourself. So it starts with assessment. Nothing can be done if you're basing yourself off the assessment of others. You're already dead in the water, right?
Hmm.
Because others don't know you the way you do, right? Hence why they probably laid you off, right? So you have to make sure you know who you are. And now, regardless of what they think, you have to now build yourself up through all of your chapters of your book, right? And now start writing for the next chapter, right? And that's so important. A lot of people put the pen down after they laid off though,
Mark,
and they
this is
stop
really
writing.
fantastic because I think that, we're going to have tons of people on this podcast from different companies and they're going to be sharing their experiences. I've talked to several already, and one of the things that's really common is this sense of clarity. You talk because they're actually going, and some of them have actually gone through several layoffs,
Mhm.
and they talk about the career clarity they have in terms of going to the next. They're very very specific on this is the type of company I want to work for,
Mhm.
manager I want to work. These are the type of projects I want to work on, simply because they've been able to do that work. That says
Mhm.
this is what's aligned to who I am, the superpowers I bring to the table, and all of that accrues to the confidence that they kind of have. So I think it's been really interesting because that processing really does matter. It's critical to the next chapter.
Yeah, and it gives you choice, right?
Hmm.
Here's the thing that you have as a free agent, you have choice now. Once you get through that processing of the divorce, I call it, you now have choice now, and you can go out and see what the needs of the, I call it the world now, other companies, and now see how my superpower can fix that need, right?
Hmm.
And then the interview process with confidence happens, right? Because you're not interviewing from a negative space, from a, oh my God, I got let go from this company. You're interviewing and saying, I see what you got a problem, I can assess it and I can fix it, and here's how I can do it. Now all of a sudden they're like, whoa, if you can fix my problem, you're in, right?
Hmm.
And that's where confidence come in play. Your skill set has always been there, but how do you apply your skill sets to whatever you're looking for gives you the control back, right? And it gives you options now because of where you've been, you know exactly what you want from a company. Now you interview them. And now you make sure that they are going to meet your needs, right? Because you're coming from a place of not beginning at the start, but now from experience.
Hmm.
So it's just going to be invaluable, whether it's salary talks, whether it's workplace environment talks, whether it's leadership and what I look for in my leadership, what I want to be as a leader. I mean, my goodness, the interview can go for 4 hours if you really want to get to some substance because you have substance to bring to the table because of your experience. Can you imagine having an interview with you today, Leo, versus someone who just got out of college?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a whole different interview process, right?
Yep.
From the interviewee standpoint, they're just looking at what they're. I'm just happy to be here. I'm just thankful, and you're coming in from a standpoint of we're partners.
Mm-hmm.
You know, here's what I can add to you, right? So I think being laid off, and I'm gonna say this, being a free agent, it allows you now to now control your destiny a little bit more,
Yeah, no,
right?
this is fabulous, and I know that even that itself is a little bit scary too. But we'll continue to talk about tools and things that people can use to manage that. So, Marcus, we're down to the last question. So,
Okay.
um, if you had to put a message on a billboard to folks who've been laid off, and you have limited space, you got limited, it's like, but you just want them to remember this one thing, what would it be?
Who are you?
Mm.
Because that's going to dictate the next step, right? You can't get to the last step until you know the first step.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you? Right? I need to know as a therapist, I need to know who you are, how you see yourself, right? And as a therapist, I need to know what your goals are, right? And if you don't know those two, we can work on them. But those two have to be accomplished before we can even know what route to take, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So who are you? Because that's important in any life, whether it's tech or not, but definitely in tech, right? Because here's the thing with tech, right? This is the movement with tech over the last 30, 40 years, right? Tech was like the gold rush, right? It not only distinguished who was making all the money, right? It changed capitalism a little bit because before it was Wall Street, right? Be an investor, and now all of a sudden now it was tech, right? So people went to the money. The other piece of it was it created what I call a exclusive population because even with Wall Street, I could walk up into Wall Street with no degree, and if I was good at what I did, I would make money. With tech, it was still something there that would separate you from everybody else. And if you didn't have that something, you was not going to make it. You couldn't just BS your way through this, right? And I think that that's what made tech in this society so identifiable, but also so exclusive. So when you get laid off from a tech company, it's a other people are your own peers are looking at you saying, "Oh my gosh, you have fallen from the ranks, like an obstacle course, right? You have fallen from the ranks and you can no longer be in this position," which in actuality, what they're saying is, "Oh my God, I hope that never happens to me," right? So you got to see it because it's a very exclusive company. Even though it's a lot of tech companies out here, when you look at it, it's not a lot of people who can do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you guys are in a very exclusive ranking, understanding tech and actually applying it. But that's what makes it so severe when the layoff comes, right? Because it's not like you can go out there and be like hypothetically speaking, not putting any industry down, but if I'm a CEO of a company or if I work selling T-shirts per se, if a company lays me off, I can go anywhere with that skill set and be like, okay, let me do it. Tech is so different because it's such a close knit community, meaning they're going to evaluate where you came from a skill deficit or a skill assessment, right? But they're also going to assess your confidence, right? Because again, they don't want someone who's not. Tech is more confident based than skill based to me because I know a lot of engineers,
Mm-hmm.
and I know a lot of engineers that fail. Not because they have, I mean, MIT, Harvard, the education and skills are there, the confidence is not there. So which means that they fail. Like even with you, I mean, we look at your history of who you are and how you got to Microsoft. Would you say what percent are you in to just make it to where you were in Microsoft? And you have to ask yourself that, right? So it's some skills that you needed or that you used to get to where you were, right? And you beat some people out who on paper is like, wait a minute, I have all this education. Why can't I get where Leo is at? Right. And that's the difference. Leo probably had the confidence to sit there and say, whatever job you have, I can fix it. I can do it. Right. So I think who you are is very important, Leo. Knowing who you are, don't forget who you are. And then the biggest thing is, where do I want to go? Now let
Man,
me reimagine my future.
man, powerful lessons, Marcus. Thank you. This
Okay.
we are wrapping this up. Marcus, thank you for the time. Just you've dropped some gems, and I know that, of course, we're gonna have you back. Where can people find you? Where can people find your work? Where can people reach out to you?
Yeah, optimalcounseling.com, .net, I'm sorry. Optimalcounseling.net is where they can find me. My number is 425-403-6260. And you got my email address is marcus at optimalcounseling.net. Those are my direct lines. And the one thing I try to strive for in my business, right, because I'm an entrepreneur, is making sure that I can connect with people one on one, right? Because I don't want to lose that. I don't want to grow so big. And I got therapists that are working for me, but I don't want to grow so big to where I can't connect to the people who need the help, right? So
Mm,
my wife understands my role and my passion. So, even if it's 10 o'clock at night, Leo, I answer the phone like, hey, how can I help you? And we'll set something up. But I don't want to leave people stranded because of the industry that I'm in, right? We're talking mental health, right? So
mhm.
people are dealing with life issues. So how selfish it is for me to tell them, I can't deal with your life issues right now because I got my own, right?
Yeah,
I have to practice my own stuff so I can be ready for your needs. So
yeah.
so those are the contacts for me. You can contact me anytime.
And I'll drop those in the show notes for everybody. And again, like I think even just sharing your experiences, again, I love the blend of your business experience, your clinical training, and how you kind of combine that into this value that you're providing for our community. So thank you for the time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's been a great opportunity to talk with Marcus. We're going to have Marcus back again to share some more topics. And so grateful for his time and expertise. This is what we're about when we talk about the Laid Off Legends community. It is about um, reclaiming your story and being able to understand how you see yourself in this new chapter of your life. It's about finding a community of people who have like-minded folks who are rediscovering a new passion, and it's about redesigning the future and how we can provide the tools to help you get to where you want to go. So thank you all for the time today. We look forward to seeing you in the next podcast. Until then, take care, everybody, and have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you. All right.